Cardinal John Leavitt had spent decades serving the Catholic Church. He was known across the world for his calm voice, steady leadership, and deep understanding of theology. Though he had lived a life full of meetings, ceremonies, and quiet diplomacy, there were moments when even he felt surprised by how quickly things could change. One such moment came on a quiet morning in Rome, when news broke that shocked many people. Bishop Robert Prevost had been chosen as the new pope. Leavitt sat in his small apartment in Chicago, far away from the Vatican, but still very much connected to its inner workings. He had once been considered a possible candidate for pope himself. That never happened, and he had long since accepted his role as a guiding figure behind the scenes. Still, when he heard the news about Prevost, he paused. The name was familiar, of course. Every bishop in the United States was known to him, in some way. But Prevost had never stood out in the way other names did. Unlike some bishops who made headlines with bold statements or public debates, Prevost had always been quiet. He served in smaller dioceses, led with humility, and rarely gave interviews. Some called him the shepherd with no spotlight. Others saw him as a man of deep faith but not someone ready for the global stage. So why had the College of Cardinals chosen him? As the news spread, journalists scrambled to learn more about this unexpected choice. They looked into his past, searching for clues about what kind of pope he might become. They found that he had grown up in a modest home in Pennsylvania, studied theology in Rome, and later worked in parishes where he often walked among the poor, helping those in need. He was known for listening more than speaking and for treating everyone with kindness, whether they were powerful cardinals or struggling families. But while many admired his humility, others were confused. The Catholic Church was at a crossroads. It faced challenges from within and outside, questions about modernization, calls for reform, and rising tensions between traditionalists and progressives. Many had expected the next pope to come from Europe or Latin America, places where the Church had strong roots. Few imagined that the new leader would be from the United States, especially one so unknown. Leavitt watched all of this unfold with a thoughtful expression. He knew the Vatican well enough to understand that behind every papal selection, there were layers of discussion, prayer, and strategy. Sometimes, the most surprising choices turned out to be the most important ones. But he also knew that being pope was not just about being holy or humble. It meant standing at the center of a worldwide institution, making decisions that affected billions of lives, and facing criticism from all directions. He thought back to his own time in Rome, the long nights spent in quiet halls, the whispered conversations before major votes, the careful weighing of names. Being close to power meant seeing both its beauty and its burden, and now, that burden had fallen on Bishop Prevost. In the days that followed, speculation grew. What would Prevost's first message be? Would he continue the path set by his predecessor, or would he chart a new course? Would he bring fresh ideas, or would he struggle to keep up with the demands of the role? No one had clear answers, but everyone wanted to know more. Back in Chicago, Leavitt received several calls from fellow church leaders and reporters. Most asked the same question: "What do you think of Bishop Prevost?" He answered politely, offering general praise for the man's service and character, but inside he wondered. He respected Prevost's faith and dedication, but experience had taught him that good intentions weren't always enough. The Vatican was a place where tradition held tight, politics played quietly, and even the holiest of men could find themselves caught in forces beyond their control. Still, Leavitt believed in the Holy Spirit's role in the selection of a pope. He had seen too much to doubt that something greater was at work. Maybe Prevost was the right man at the right time. Or maybe his election was a test, for the Church, for the world, and for Prevost himself. As the sun set over Chicago and the city lights began to glow, Leavitt closed his eyes and said a quiet prayer. Not just for the new pope, but for the Church, for peace and for wisdom in the days ahead. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Nothing would be the same again. And somewhere far away, in a room filled with red-robed cardinals and the scent of incense, a new chapter was beginning, a chapter that would soon take a turn no one expected. especially when Cardinal Leavitt himself would speak, not in private, but during a live interview that would send shockwaves through the entire world. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. For now, the world waited, watching closely as history unfolded. And at the heart of it all stood a humble bishop from the United States, stepping into a role far greater than anyone had imagined. The morning after the announcement, Cardinal John Leavitt was sitting at his desk when a call came in. It was from a well-known international news network. The voice on the other end was polite but urgent. Cardinal Leavitt, the producer, said, "We're doing a special live broadcast on the new pope, and we'd be honored if you could join us for a few minutes." Leavitt paused. He wasn't someone who enjoyed being on television. He preferred quiet meetings, long letters, and thoughtful discussions behind closed doors. But he also knew that people were confused about the new pope. They wanted answers, opinions, and guidance. And whether he liked it or not, many looked to him for those things. After a short moment, he agreed. "I'll do it," he said calmly. "But I ask that this remain respectful and thoughtful." The interview was set for later that day. By then, the whole world seemed to be talking about Bishop Robert Prevost. Some praised his humility and faith. Others questioned whether he had the experience to lead such a large and complex church. There were rumors flying everywhere, some true, most not. And all of it added pressure to the moment when Leavitt would finally speak. As the camera lights turned on and the studio filled with quiet energy, Leavitt sat tall in his chair. He was used to speaking in front of crowds, but there was always something different about being on live television. The words couldn't be edited. The silence couldn't be cut out. Every pause mattered. The host smiled warmly and began. "Cardinal Leavitt, thank you so much for joining us today. You've known many bishops over your long career. What are your thoughts on Bishop Prevost becoming pope?" Leavitt nodded slightly. His voice was calm and steady as he answered. "Bishop Prevost is a good man. He has served the church faithfully for many years. He's known for his kindness, his listening heart, and his deep love for God's people." There were nods from the hosts. That was the expected response. But what came next surprised everyone. Leavitt took a breath and leaned forward just a little. "However," he continued, "I think it's important to recognize that being pope is not only about being holy or humble, it's also about leading an ancient institution through modern challenges, and those challenges are growing every day." The room grew still. Even the camera crew seemed to move more quietly. People watching at home started to lean in, sensing that something unusual was happening. Leavitt didn't look away from the camera. "Pope Prevost will face difficult decisions," he went on. "He will need to speak clearly, act bravely, and stand firm in times of great pressure. Whether he is ready for that kind of leadership is something only time will tell." One of the co-hosts, clearly caught off guard, asked, "Do you mean to say you doubt his ability to lead?" Leavitt shook his head gently. "Not at all," he replied. "I'm simply saying that the role of pope is unlike any other. It requires not only faith but strength, not only prayer but wisdom. And while Bishop Prevost has shown great promise, he now enters a world where even the best intentions can be tested in ways no one can predict." Another host jumped in. "You yourself were once considered a possible candidate for pope. How does it feel to see someone like Bishop Prevost chosen instead?" Leavitt smiled faintly. "It feels like the Holy Spirit is still moving," he said. "We may try to guess who should lead, but ultimately it is not our choice. I respect Bishop Prevost deeply, and I will support him in every way I can. But I also believe honesty is part of that support." By now, viewers across the world were reacting. Some said Leavitt was wise and brave to speak so openly. Others thought he was being too harsh, even disrespectful. On social media, clips of the interview were shared thousands of times. Hashtags like Leavitt says and Prevost challenge started trending. Back in Rome, Vatican officials watched the interview closely. Some advisors frowned at Leavitt's words. Others found them refreshing, a rare moment of truth in a world often filled with careful silence. In the days that followed, church leaders debated what Leavitt had meant. Was he warning the new pope? Or was he offering a challenge? Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the Vatican, Pope Prevost watched the clip himself. He didn't show anger or surprise. Instead, he simply sat and listened. Then, turning to one of his closest aides, he said softly, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I have a lot to learn." That night, Leavitt returned home from the studio. Reporters waited outside his building, hoping for a comment. He gave none. Instead, he walked inside, removed his coat, and sat by the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled, and somewhere far away, a new pope prepared for the first time to wear the heavy weight of leadership. Leavitt thought back to his own younger years, the dreams, the fears, the moments when he wondered if he was doing the right thing. Now he saw those same questions reflected in the eyes of a new leader. He reached for a small notebook and wrote a short message. Not for the press, not for history, but for himself. May he find the courage he needs. May we all help him find it. Then he closed the book and said a quiet prayer, because he knew that whatever happened next, the church was entering a new chapter, and whether people agreed with his words or not, Cardinal John Leavitt had done something rare. He had spoken the truth even when it was hard, and the world was listening. The next morning, the world was still talking about Cardinal Leavitt's interview. The clip had spread like wildfire across news channels, social media, and even church bulletin boards. Some people praised him for speaking honestly. Others were upset, saying he should have kept his thoughts private, but no one could deny that what he said had stirred something deep. Back in Chicago, Leavitt woke up to a full inbox. Emails from fellow bishops, messages from reporters, and even letters from ordinary Catholics poured in. One message stood out. It came from a young priest in South America who wrote, "Thank you for reminding us that even holy men can feel doubt. Maybe now we can talk more honestly about what kind of church we want." Leavitt read the letter twice and smiled. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Truth often made people uncomfortable before it helped them grow. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Vatican press office was busy handling the fallout. Reporters from all over the world gathered outside St. Peter's Basilica, asking questions about Pope. Prevost's reaction. Was he offended? Would he respond? Would there be consequences for Leavitt's remarks? Inside the Vatican walls, things were quieter than they looked. Pope Prevost sat in his modest new room, surrounded by books, a small, wooden crucifix, and a single window that looked out over the ancient city. He had spent the night in prayer and thought. His closest aide, a soft-spoken priest named Father Matteo, sat across from him. "You don't seem angry," Father Matteo said carefully. Prevost shook his head. "I'm not. I expected silence. I got honesty instead." Father Matteo nodded. "Some of the cardinals are worried. They think Leavitt may have weakened your position before you've even begun." Prevost gave a small smile. "Or maybe he reminded everyone that I'm human. That's not weakness. It's truth." Outside the Vatican, reactions were mixed. In Italy, some Catholics felt Leavitt had gone too far. A retired bishop called the comments disrespectful during a radio interview. In Brazil, however, a group of young seminarians cheered the interview online, calling it a sign that the church was finally opening up. In the United States, Catholic newspapers ran different headlines. One paper titled its front page, "Leavitt speaks out. Is the new pope ready?" Another headline read, "A call for strength, not silence." As the day wore on, TV stations replayed parts of the interview again and again. Clips showed Leavitt pausing before speaking, his calm voice carrying weight. People watched closely, trying to read between the lines. Was he giving advice? Or was he warning the world about what might come? One religious commentator said on Live Television, "This is rare. A senior cardinal speaking so openly about a newly chosen pope. It shows how much pressure the church is under. Everyone wants to know if the right man was chosen." Another guest disagreed. "I think it shows courage. He didn't attack the pope. He simply said leadership comes with great challenges. Isn't that something we should prepare for, rather than ignore?" Back in Chicago, Leavitt turned on the news just long enough to see his own face flash across the screen. He didn't watch for long. Instead, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The call connected. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "I hope I didn't make things harder for you," Leavitt said gently. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. "You told the truth," Pope Prevost replied. "That's not a crime." Leavitt let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Prevost continued, "I asked God last night why me, why not someone else? And I heard nothing, just silence. Maybe that's the answer, maybe I'm meant to find my way through the noise." Leavitt smiled. "Then walk bravely, Robert, and when the path gets hard, remember you're not alone." They talked a little longer, then hung up. Outside, the wind blew through the trees in Chicago. In Rome, sunlight spilled into the Vatican courtyard, and somewhere in between, two men carried their own burdens, one as a leader, the other as a guide. Later, that evening, a statement was released from the Vatican. It was short and peaceful. It said, "We give thanks for every voice within the Church. May we listen with open hearts and speak with love. Pope Prevost remains focused on serving God and his people." It didn't mention Leavitt by name, but those who read carefully understood its meaning. The Church wasn't breaking apart. It was shifting, slowly, gently, but surely, and the world was watching. In classrooms, churches, and homes, people discussed what had happened. Young Catholics saw it as a moment of change. Older believers saw it as a test of faith. Journalists saw it as a turning point in church history. But beyond all the voices, one thing remained clear. The new pope had taken his place at the center of a global family. And whether he wanted it or not, he was now part of a conversation that would shape the future. As night fell over Rome, Prevost lit a candle beside his window. He looked at the flame, steady and bright, and whispered a simple prayer. Not for power, not for praise, just for strength. And far away in Chicago, Cardinal Leavitt did the same, because both men knew something most didn't. True leadership doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with the courage to ask questions. And sometimes, the loudest truth is spoken in silence. In the days that followed Cardinal Leavitt's interview, the world kept watching. The Vatican remained calm on the outside, but behind its tall walls and heavy doors, things were shifting quietly. Meetings were held in low voices. Notes were passed between cardinals who had served for decades, and in every room one question echoed softly. What happens now? Pope Prevost had not responded publicly to Leavitt's comments, and that silence spoke louder than many expected. Some thought he was avoiding the issue. Others believed he was choosing peace over power. But those closest to him knew the truth. He was thinking, praying, and preparing for what lay ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Rome, Pope Prevost sat alone in his private study. He had just finished reading a long letter from a group of young Catholics from different countries. They had written with honesty and hope, asking if the Church could become more open, more understanding, and more connected to the modern world. Their words stayed with him. Father Matteo entered quietly, holding a small folder. "There are requests for interviews," he said gently. "Many want to hear your voice after what Cardinal Leavitt said." Prevost looked up. "And what do you think I should say?" Father Matteo smiled slightly. "I think you should say what you always do. The truth." The Pope nodded slowly. Then he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. He took a deep breath. "I don't want to fight," he said softly. "But I also don't want to hide." Father Matteo waited patiently. Prevost turned back toward him. "Let's go to St. Peter's Square tomorrow. No cameras, just me and the people." Father Matteo raised an eyebrow. "You mean, just walk out there?" "Yes," Prevost replied. "They need to see me. Not the Pope they read about. Not the Pope some fear or praise. Just me. A man trying to serve God and his Church." It was a bold move. Popes rarely appeared without careful planning. Every step was usually mapped out. Every word reviewed. But Prevost wanted something different. He wanted to remind the world that leadership begins with connection. The next morning, news spread quickly. Without warning, Pope Prevost stepped into St. Peter's Square. People gasped at first, then gathered closer. Children pointed. Tourists reached for their phones. Priests whispered prayers. He walked slowly, stopping often to shake hands, smile, and listen. At one point, a young girl offered him a drawing she had made. He accepted it with both hands and thanked her warmly. An old man knelt before him, and, instead of turning away, Prevost helped him up and hugged him. For nearly an hour he moved among the crowd. No speeches. No guards. Just presence. Back in Chicago, Cardinal Leavitt watched the footage on TV. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. He saw what Prevost was doing, not proving himself to the world, but showing the world that faith doesn't have to be distant. It can be close enough to touch. Later that day, a short video was shared online. It showed Pope Prevost speaking quietly to a group of reporters who had followed him. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound defensive. Instead, he said, "I heard what Cardinal Leavitt said, and I thank him for it. Truth is hard sometimes, but it is needed. We cannot grow if we pretend everything is fine when it isn't." Then he paused and added, "I am new to this role. I know I will make mistakes. But I also know that I am not here to be perfect. I am here to serve." The clip went viral within hours. In classrooms, families talked about it. In churches, priests played it during sermons. In homes across the world, people felt something shift. Some called it bravery, others called it humility, but most called it hope. Meanwhile, inside the Vatican, cardinals met again. This time, the mood was different. Some who had been worried now looked thoughtful. One cardinal, known for being strict and formal, leaned toward another and said, "Maybe Leavitt was right. Maybe this pope will lead in a way we never expected. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing." As the week came to a close, letters began arriving at the Vatican, not from bishops or politicians, but from ordinary people. A mother from Kenya wrote about raising her children in a world that often feels uncertain. A student from Canada asked how the church could better support young people. A priest from India shared stories of helping the poor and how the church could help more. Prevost read each letter carefully. He didn't respond with grand speeches. Instead, he began writing back, short, kind notes that carried weight because they were real. Back in Chicago, Cardinal Leavitt received a message from Rome. It was simple. "Thank you for your honesty. Let us walk forward together." Leavitt read it twice. Then he folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. Not to forget, but to remember. Because he knew something few others did. Change doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments. In words. In choices. And the church was changing. Not because of one interview. Not because of one pope. But because people were finally listening. To each other. To God. And to the quiet call of truth. The days turned into weeks, and life inside the Vatican slowly changed. Pope Prevost had not made big speeches or dramatic reforms, but he had done something powerful. He had shown the world that leadership could be quiet, kind, and full of listening. Back in Chicago, Cardinal John Leavitt watched this unfold with calm eyes. He didn't seek the spotlight anymore. He spent his time in prayer, meetings, and small visits to local parishes, but every now and then, he would think back to that interview, the one that had started it all. He remembered the moment the camera was on him, the way his voice had carried across homes and phones and screens. He hadn't meant to stir things up. He had only wanted to speak truthfully, even if it made people uncomfortable. Now, as he walked through the quiet halls of his home, he realized that sometimes the most important changes don't come from loud voices or big plans. Sometimes, they begin with a single honest word. One evening, as the sky turned deep blue over Chicago, Leavitt sat at his desk and opened a letter. It was from Rome. The handwriting was neat and familiar. Dear Cardinal Leavitt, I hope you are well. I write to thank you once again for your honesty. It was not easy to hear, but it was needed. In these first weeks, I have tried to walk gently, listen closely, and lead with care. I do not know what the future holds, but I feel more certain now than I did before. We are called not to fear change, but to welcome it when it comes from love. Please pray for me, and know that I pray for you. In Christ's peace, Pope Robert Prevost Leavitt read the letter twice. Then he placed it beside a small wooden cross on his desk. He smiled softly and whispered a prayer for the new pope, not just for strength, but for joy. Meanwhile, in Rome, Pope Prevost continued his quiet journey. He visited hospitals, met with poor families, and talked with young people who had questions about faith. He didn't always have answers, but he listened with open ears and a warm heart. One day he traveled outside the city to visit a small parish in the countryside. There, he shared a simple meal with locals, laughed with children, and helped clean the church after Mass. No cameras followed. No reporters asked questions. Just a priest among his people. Father Matteo walked beside him as they returned to the car. "You seem lighter," he said. Prevost nodded. "Maybe I am." "You've faced a lot already," Father Matteo added. Prevost looked out at the rolling hills and smiled. "Yes, but I've also found something, the freedom to be real." Back in the Vatican, cardinals began to notice a shift. Meetings were less about control and more about service. Decisions were made with more care for ordinary people. Some bishops even started visiting their own dioceses more often instead of staying behind closed doors. It wasn't a sudden revolution. It was a slow, steady turning, like the sun rising after a long night, and the world noticed. Newspapers wrote stories not just about the Pope's actions but about his style, how he spoke, how he listened, how he seemed to carry both wisdom and humility in equal measure. Some still questioned whether he was strong enough. Others wondered if he could handle the storms that might come, but many more saw something rare, a leader who didn't try to impress but to connect. In Chicago, Leavitt received more letters, some from priests, some from students, some from people who had left the church years ago but now felt drawn back. One letter came from a woman in Australia. She wrote, "I stopped going to church because it felt too far away from my life. But watching Pope Prevost has reminded me that God isn't far. He's near. In kindness. In listening. In truth." Leavitt read those words with tears in his eyes. He knew the church wasn't perfect. He never believed it was. But he also believed that even broken things could shine. As spring came to both Rome and Chicago, a sense of renewal settled over the church. Not because everything had changed overnight, but because people had begun to believe again, in hope, in honesty, and in each other. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of two men, one in Rome, one in Chicago, there was peace. They had taken different paths, but now they walked the same road, a road built not on power but on love, not on silence but on truth, and not on fear but on faith. As the bells of St. Peter's rang one Sunday morning, Pope Prevost stood at the window and waved to the crowd below. Children waved back. Tourists took photos. Priests blessed the people. And far away, in a small chapel in Chicago, Cardinal Leavitt knelt quietly in prayer. Two men, one mission, a church still learning how to love the world, and a story that would live on, not in headlines but in hearts.